Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Affleck, and today we're going to talk about GTO, the hottest topic the last 4 or 5 years in poker, game theory optimal. Um, let's start with a basic definition. Like game theory optimal strategies create a perfect balance by adjusting bet sizes, hand ranges, and strategies that help make neutralize the EV of their opponents. Basically, game theory optimal comes from prisoner's dilemma and back in game theory studies, um, two players essentially knowing each other's strategy are going to try to neutralize each other until there's no EV made. And that's where a solver output kind of comes out, where there's two strategies where neither player's making a mistake. They're playing perfectly against each other, and there's no money to be made by either player because they're both playing a perfect strategy. So, how can we use a GTO strategy to win? Because we're in a solver world, we're playing against a perfect computer who's not going to make any mistakes. We're not going to make any mistakes. And in that case, actually, both players are going to lose because they're going to lose to the rake, which involves poker. It is involved in poker. So you win when your opponents make mistakes. Some of us get mad when our opponents make mistakes, but that's how we make money in this game, is our opponents making mistakes. And if you play a perfect GTO strategy, and since you make no mistakes, your opponents cannot win no matter what they do. And they're going to lose more money than they should because they make no mistakes. This is kind of the baseline, basic level of playing a GTO kind of strategy. However, it is impossible for humans. I've studied thousands and tens of thousands of solutions, and not that smart humans, it's impossible for a human to play a perfect strategy. And so we need to find ways to implement these strategies um, into our gameplay. And the overall goal with GTO, or learning how to study and play these, is to become your own solver. That's what I like to tell my students, is you want to become your own solver. So we're studying these computer outputs, and our goal is to take things away from them that are implementable and easier to understand why the solver is doing it. The questions you should always be asking is, why is the computer doing this? Why are they trying, what are they trying to accomplish? And the more you can understand, the easier it will be for you to implement this into your own strategies and own game. And when you're in game playing against opponents, given all the information you have, does this player continuation bet too much? Do they fold too much? Are they too aggressive? All this, you can kind of produce your own output, your own solver solution of what you think is the optimal strategy at this point. That's what every poker player's goal is, and that's what everyone should be trying to do to win the most amount of money. So we always get this discussion about, oh, is it, best to play exploitable poker? Is it best to play GTO? It's like all of that is noise, and I think people really focus on kind of the wrong questions. And really, it's not that hard to understand its most basic function. Once your opponents make mistakes, you should deviate to maximally exploit those mistakes and make the most amount of money possible. However, you need to understand the consequences of that. And the consequences would be, you understand you reopen yourself to be re exploited. So let's take, for example, like a basic river situation, and you know your opponent bluffs 0% of the time, and they bet half pot on the river, and they have 0% bluffs. You should fold every single hand that doesn't beat their value range. You should just fold 100% of the time, unless you have a hand that could beat whatever hands they're value betting. Not that hard to understand. And you can start just overfolding and fold everything. That's the maximal EV strategy. You make the most EV. In our last videos, we talked about expected value, and that's how you make money in poker, is by maximizing your EV. However, you need to understand that maybe your opponent will pick up that you fold every time, and now they might start. Well, their adjustment should be, oh, they're folding every time. I'm gonna start bluffing every single time. and bluff 100%, and now you're giving them EV because you're overfolding and you're giving them very profitable expected value bluff situations. Okay, so this is what a solver output, a Nash equilibrium output is, that it neutralizes that EV gain where both players are making no money against each other. And in the real world, though, that is not what's happening. The important thing to recognize is like a GTO solution will always be the maximal EV strategy. Your goal is to make the most EV in poker. So, pros and cons of a GTO strategy, and let's just kind of talk about a baseline. If you just play whatever strategy the solver spits out, um, what's going on there? Well, it works well against all types of players because you're always going to make money. Your opponents are going to make mistakes, and you just make money. The more mistakes they make, the more money you make. Um, it's excellent against really strong players. So, in general, the stronger the player, the more you should try to play closer to a baseline strategy without adjustments. Stronger players are going to be able to pick up on your mistakes. The more often you play with these players, they'll pick up on your mistakes more often. So, the stronger the players, more often you play against them, the more you want to play a little bit more closer to like a baseline strategy. It's excellent when you have no reads. Because if you don't have any reads, it's really hard to make adjustments. You don't know which ways you want to make adjustments. So you kind of just play your baseline game until you are comfortable making adjustments versus opponents. So when I'm sitting down at a table, I'm always kind of playing my baseline at the beginning. And assuming I have no experience, as soon as showdowns start happening, I see in hands, oh, this player didn't bluff here. They should have bluffed here. So I'm going to start folding more to them because I don't think they bluff enough. Boom, make an adjustment. Um, this player uh, bluffed here with a hand. They're going to be bluffing way too much if they're bluffing that hand. I'm going to start calling them a lot more on the river. These are the types of adjustments I'm looking for to develop my reads. Things that I notice that deviate. They're deviating their strategy, and then thinking about what's the most basic assumption. It doesn't have to be super complex. The cons of a GTO strategy, it's incredibly complex and it's difficult to implement. So we're going to get into this. No one, no human, I don't care, the best players in the world are not, no one is like playing a perfect GTO strategy. And the reason is it's way too hard to implement. It's almost impossible to implement as a human. There's too many different boards, there's too many different board textures, there's too many different variables for a human to be able to implement. Um, Also, it does not maximally exploit mistakes. So, as your opponents make mistakes, you want to be capitalizing those mistakes. If your opponents don't bluff enough, you want to fold more. If they bluff too much, you want to call more. Um, you know, it sounds simple, and in the baseline, it really is. Poker is a very complex game, but it's also a very simple game. Um, if that makes any sense, hopefully, people that have played the game for a long time probably understand that. I think sometimes, myself included, overcomplicate the game sometimes. So let's talk about how does a solver generate these inputs. To solve any spot, starting ranges. Everything is based off of ranges. And this is why I'm a big proponent. If you watch my webinars on poker coaching and all that, I'm a big, big proponent on pre-flop play and knowing ranges super, super well. Knowing these ranges helps everything. So that's the most important thing. You need to know stack depths. How deep are you? You need to put in possible bets and raise sizes for each player. And if you're not starting with pre-flop, you need to know the pre-flop previous actions if you're solving like a turn or the river spot. But most of the times you'll be starting from the flop, and so that will be the case. The solver doesn't know if it's a 3-bet pot. The solver doesn't know if it's a 4-bet pot. The solver doesn't know if this was a limped pot. All it knows is starting ranges, stack depths. It doesn't even know who's in position and who's out of position, or who raised and who didn't raise. It does know who's in position and who's out of position, but it doesn't know it in terms of like c betting. It doesn't know who raised pre-flop. All it knows is the ranges that were inputted, the stack depth, and which player is in position, which player is out of position. So it doesn't know the position, but it doesn't know who raised pre-flop or any of that. Any changes of these will impact the GTO solution. So how do we want to use a solver? So we've talked about what a solver is, what a GTO, thing is, and most people have been exposed at least a little bit to a solver. They've at least seen a solver output. And how do you want to use a solver? And this is what kind of my specialty is how to use a solver effectively. And one of the best ways to use a solver is change one variable at a time and see what changes. Learn what shifts in strategy and learn what causes these shifts. All right. And this is how you start to learn one variable. So let's take a very basic example. Let's say you raise the button, the big blind calls, and the flop comes Jack 7 deuce rainbow on the flop. Solver will probably suggest a range bet or very close to it on Jack 7 deuce rainbow. Now you might want to change it to what if there's a flush draw on Jack 7 deuce? I'm guessing it probably is going to still range bet or very close to it, but in general, you're going to bet more often on rainbow flops than flush draw flops. And then the third one is actually what I think is going to create the most change. What if it is Jack 7-5 instead of Jack 7 deuce? And you're going to notice on Jack 7-5, there's a lot more checking on the button than there is on Jack 7 deuce. And that's because the big blind's going to have a lot more connectivity around the 7, a lot more connectivity around the 5. All their 6x hands now have 3 to a straight versus on Jack 7 deuce, their hands like King 6, Ace 6, 9 6, 6 4. All these hands are folding on the flop. Now on Jack 7 5, those hands are actually medium to strong draws. So learning like by a basic example there, you can learn the more connected the flop is. Jack 7-5 is more connected. There's tons of straight draws on both sides of the 7. Then on Jack 7 deuce, the deuce doesn't provide any straight draws. So the more connected the flop is, the more you check. Probably the bigger you bet. And yeah, the more careful you want to be in your c-bet strategy. Versus on Jack 7 deuce, the more disconnected the flop is, the more you're going to check. And this is when I talk about learning patterns, learning how bet sizes change on variables, learning how checking and betting frequencies change. You want to learn these implementable ideas and frameworks that will allow you to produce these strategies in game. So the confusing thing with solvers is they often produce a mixed strategy. So a lot of people think the solver always plays the same way, plays all the hands the same. The solver actually makes different plays with each hand at some frequency sometimes. Um, and it's important to understand what mixing means. So if we look here on the right, and let's take a look here at Jack 10 suited. You can look, the brown is betting and the green is checking. And it looks like it's betting about 50% of the time and it's checking about 50% of the time. What this means is the EV, which we studied in the last video, of betting and the EV of checking is very likely equal. Okay, and it has to be equal. The EV, if the EV of betting was always better than checking, the solver would 100% bet Jack 10 suited. Um, so let's assume this flop is, what do we think this flop is on this board? Aces, kings. uh, Basically, like let's say this is an out of position spot. Maybe the solver wants to check Jack 10 suited because it expects the in position player to bet a lot and then we can check raise with Jack 10 suited. Or maybe it expects to not get many folds, and if the in position player was going to overfold and Jack 10 suited wanted to fold, the EV of betting Jack 10 suited would go up. So it's important to recognize when something is mixing, that means the EV of betting and checking are equal. And what we want to do in that point is use our exploits. Okay, does this player fold too much? Do they raise too much? Are they very passive? And how does that influence this close decision between checking or betting? Um, you hear people talk about randomizing. Well, you want to check 50% of the time, bet 50% of the time here with Jack 10 suited. Well, in reality, a better solution than randomizing would be exploits. Oh, if I want to fold when I'm betting with Jack 10 suited, let's say this board is King Queen 5, and I know this player is going to fold too much to my bet, well, then we should just bet. If I know this player is going to raise a ton and check raise a ton when we bet, well, we don't really want to get raised when we have Jack 10 suited. Let's say the board was like king queen five, so maybe we check now because we're gonna get this player's gonna raise too much. So understanding then how to make adjustments based on these mixed strategies. So learn from the solver. Uh, Many patterns repeat themselves, and so look for them. And this is what I talk about. You want to become your own solver. Do not try to copy outputs. That's not going to work, and that's not how any professional is trying to think. When your range is heavily, you want to look for patterns. So, for example, the very basics. When you have a range advantage in spots, you often want to put chips into the pot. When you have a range disadvantage, like you call from the big blind, you're going to be checking a lot. A very common strategy with how to play pocket pairs. Let's say that flop is Jack 7 4, and you're going to be checking a lot on the flop. You're probably going to check pocket fives and pocket sixes a lot, um, more than you would check pocket eights, because pocket eights can bet and get a little bit of value from a 7, but pocket sixes and fives cannot get value from a 7 on Jack 7 4. So learning that, you'll notice those types of patterns always. Um, Knowing what types of hands it want to bluff with. Does it want to bluff with the blockers to the flush draw? Does it want to bluff with actual flush draws? Understanding all these types of patterns, which takes a lot of time, and then implementing them into your game effectively is how you want to learn from solvers. You don't want to try to copy the output. Um, Learn the key takeaways, repeatable patterns to implement. After you start to study with a solver a lot and see the same things over and over again, you'll realize the solvers, like the strategy, become predictable. There's a lot of predictable things in the solver, and that's what we try to, you know, show. One of the best ways to study is you look at a hand and you guess what the strategy overall is supposed to be. So I might say something like, I think our range wants a continuation of that a lot here for a small sizing because our opponent misses this board a lot and we have a range advantage. And we'll look at the solver, and maybe the solver is saying, hey, we actually want to check a lot on this board and just bet big. Or maybe it's saying it confirms my strategy. And then learning what's differentiating and trying to explore and find out the why. Why is the solver's answer better than your answer? Um, Repeatable patterns. That's everything here. Learn how ranges interact. Range interaction is everything in the solver. Probably one of the most important things in all of poker. And then changing one variable at a time. You want to change one variable to see what happens. How does the solver change the strategy if you double the stack to pot ratio? If you make it twice as deep stacked, 100 big blinds instead of 50 big blinds, or 25 big blinds instead of 50, how do strategies change? And you'll notice the solver plays a lot more careful at 100 big blinds because you need a stronger hand to stack off with than at 25 big blinds, where if it has top pair, it's probably going to try to get all the money in. Lots of different solvers, different types of AI out there. Poker Snowy, Simple GTO Poker, PO Solver, which is probably the most popular. Lots of different software out there and different solvers that are using different algorithms, whatever, to try to come to the same solutions. Try them all out, see which ones you like. Some have better interfaces than others, some are more user friendly than others, some are not user friendly, but maybe a little bit more powerful. Lots of different, things. Get in there, try it out. Use a game theory approach when you're playing against strong opponents, when you're playing against unknown opponents, when you don't have reads. Do not use a GTO strategy when your opponent makes frequent mistakes that you can adjust to capitalize on. So you have your baseline strategy that you want to learn, and then you're adjusting that strategy based on your opponents to try to win the most amount of EV and capitalize on their mistakes. Um, Thanks for everyone for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.